Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in. In today's video, I would like to go over modifying the dual throttle for the A-10 HOTAS by Thrustmaster. And as usual, we have the sim loaded and DCS-BIOS is already up and running. And we have our Arduino, and it's already plugged into the host computer. So as you know, with the A-10, the enhanced attitude control is a magnetically held switch, so that if you lose something, for example on your sauce panel, the switch disengages and it won't re-engage until you correct the error. So we will do that in this case with the sim, and now that I've corrected the error, the switch will now re-engage. So in this video, we would like to go over modifying the A-10's dual throttle to include a magnetically held switch. So for starters, in this particular modification, I'm actually wearing a ground strap just to make sure, because we are modifying circuit boards and whatnot, and we just want to be extra cautious with ESD. So this particular modification was involved is originally you have a circuit card here. It was this particular board that was actually installed roughly in this area. So we've removed that circuit card and replaced it with a magnetically held switch, 2 toggle switches, and a little board here that we installed to drive the magnetically held switch. And you can see this little board in previous videos as well. I talk about that. So in order to modify this guy, I think I accidentally hit the radar altimeter there. So in order to modify this guy, you want to remove these 2 screws with a Phillips head screwdriver. For example, is some of the tools that you'll use. Once you take these 2 screws loose, there's a double-sided tape holding on this faceplate. Just pop that up, and there's 3 nuts holding these toggle switches, and it's actually these guys here. And once you remove that faceplate, though, you can use a pair of needle nose pliers, and you can get in there and take those off. And once you take those off, this board drops out. There's actually one other screw. Once you remove these 3 nuts and you go back on the other side, right now I'm using that same screw to hold on my little circuit card. But if you remove this screw here, then this guy comes out. So let's just go over some of all the pieces that you will need to make this modification happen. And I just got a few things laying out here. For example, let me just kind of wrote down a little bill of materials here. So for example, of course, you want your magnetically held switch, a 2-pole version in this case, and that's what we have installed. You can kind of see on the diagram here. You want a 2-pole magnetically held switch. Toggle switches, you want a 2-position toggle switch and a 3-position toggle switch. And that's these guys here. And a previous video, I think it was the emergency flight control panel, I went over part numbers for these guys. And the lighting control panel, I went over various part numbers you can find for magnetically held switches as well. So other stuff you would need is like the DC power jack, for example. I'm using that to bring in the voltage to drive the switch, for example. And I just used a little duct tape or electrical tape to cover up the exposed contacts, since that is 24 volts. And this is actually kind of exposed. So once you solder on your wires, I just kind of cover up the conductors so that nothing is exposed there. Let's see what else we've used. Okay, so in order to talk to the Arduino, we have a DI to watch the EAC switch, Enhanced Attitude Control switch. We need to bring a ground over from our board to over to the switch, and we need another DO to drive the coil of that switch. So those we used a connector to just bring those wires over. And the connector is kind of arbitrary. I mean, you don't have to use this exact one, but I just kind of used these I actually got from PCFlights.com, and order some sockets as well for this guy. Okay, so we use that connector. Let's see, that's a 2.54 pitch female socket connector, the sockets, the male header, which is this guy. So you have that. You are going to need some wire, and here I'm just using 24 gauge American wire gauge, and you can kind of see a part number on that, but like I said, it's not crucial. I use 24 gauge because it's a little bit easier to work with. I wouldn't recommend going smaller than 24 gauge though. You could use 22, but really not necessary. Used some heat shrink to cover up your conductors and whatnot. So, and of course you want solder. Let's see what else you want. Oh yeah, the transistors, I went over that in a previous video, along with this little small circuit boards, like little printed circuit board pieces. So you'll kind of need something like a hacksaw or something to cut a small piece, so you can use that to hold your transistor. You need a resistor, some electrical tape, soldering iron, and small hand tools, you know, like wire cutters, wire strippers, so things like that. So basically what we've done is, once you remove the screws from the front face and you remove this guy here, this particular connector that we cut loose, let me just show what that looks like. So this is kind of the diagram that we use to modify the Warthog. I'm gonna kind of try to just talk through it a little bit here. This particular connector, it used to go to this circuit card. So if we was looking at it, this was the this connector is that guy right there. So I basically got my own meter and buzzed out how all these switches were connected. So these three switches I could not get out of the circuit board, so that's why we're going to need to replace those, and that's why you're going to need these two guys along with your magnetic switch. So what we've done is we cut this wire here, this cable bundle, and in my case I just wired all these switches straight over and soldered it together. So like for example, I'm gonna grab this guy. This one was going to your main circuit card, and this main board here has your USB, and it's watching all of your other sensors, your other switches that's in your HOTAS, and it connects to your main board here. So what I've done is just cut off that connector, and all my wires I just kind of soldered straight into that guy. So for example, the wire for horn silence is this guy here. That's your horn silence. Over here, this was your autopilot mode select switch. This one here was your radar altimeter. You have a push button. It's kind of hard to see. You can kind of see it there. That was your autopilot engage, disengage. So basically all of those switches and push buttons, that is this bundle here, and you just wire that into this existing bundle, and you just have to match up the color codes. Like for example, the toggle switch for your path has to go to the brown wire. Your radar altimeter needs to go to the orange wire, and you'll see the colors in your cable harness that you cut. Okay, so basically what we've done is remove that circuit card, and there's a screw here that was holding on the original circuit board. You want to retain that screw, and you want to reuse it for your little mini PCB that you would install. And this guy just houses the transistor and a resistor to drive the magnetically held switch. And I went over that circuit in a previous video, and it's the exact same circuit, which is basically a noise suppression diode against a coil, so that when the coil cuts off, you don't have a huge EMI spike going through your wiring. So and this is just soldered right across the magnetically held switch itself. The transistor and the resistor is on this little board here, and that wiring we bring out to this connector here. So all those three wires are going to this guy, and this guy. So generally speaking, the source or the guy providing the power is on your socket contacts. So that's why the Arduino has the female connector, and your circuit card assembly on this side will have your male connector, since he's not providing the source of the signals. It's coming from your Arduino, so that's why he's female, and you got male on this side. Okay, so this one here, I think we went over, and that's just your DC power connector, and that's basically it. When we did this mod, you're going to end up with a power connector, and again, there's many ways you can do this. I just kind of separated it out on a power connector, and then another one I use for I/O. Okay, now when you do this particular mod, again, I think I got a little note here. You're definitely going to avoid your warranty for sure, because you're definitely cutting loose the circuit board and whatnot. So for that particular reason, that's one reason why we are wearing a ground strap, just to be extra cautious. Another thing that we've done is when you remove the screws on your bottom plate here, I'll bring this up just to show. This is kind of like a weight plate, and you got another plate up under that. So, of course, these were metal. Okay, so those guys had ground lugs, and just to be cautious, I reconnected the ground lugs together. So that circuit board had like a local ground. I cut the ground lug off of this guy. I think it was coming out of this spot, and I reattached that ground lug, which is this guy here. I reattached them to the wires going to the circuit that we just put in, just to keep that ground connection the same. So that's one thing that we've done, is reattach that ground spot. Something else you will need when you do this mod is, in order to install your magnetically held switch, you might can see there's these little tabs on either side of these push buttons, and I think you can kind of see the tabs there, those vertical tabs, if I can point them out here. Trying to see if I can get a good spot where you still have some light. Let me grab another light here, see if this works. See if I can turn this a little bit. But at any rate, these are some tabs that's protruding vertically alongside the switch holes. So those tabs would prevent you from installing the magnetically held switch. So in my case, I just used a drill, and I just drilled a couple of holes in those plastic tabs, and I got enough of the plastic tab loose that I can just use my wire cutters to remove the remaining pieces of that tab. And you will definitely need to do that to install your magnetically held switch. I started to take the tabs off the other ones, but found out it was not really necessary. These switches fit just fine, so the tabs was left in those cases. Another thing I would like to mention as well is your magnetically held switch usually comes with a larger, hit something here, turn this down. So this will not fit. So once you taken off these guys, retain one of those nuts and use this guy to hold on your to hold your magnetically held switch. So you'll use that one instead of this larger one here because this guy won't fit. So what else did we do here? Let's see. Trying to think, was it anything else? Oh yeah. One last thing to mention. Now, when you do this mod, the magnetic held switch is actually taller than your joystick there. So it will definitely protrude. So in my case, I'm installing this in a console, so I can cut a notch so that this will drop in and it will not interfere. But if you're on a flat surface, you would need to come up with an additional a modified plate or something to have some kind of plate at the bottom with a notch cut out so that the magnetic switch would slip down inside. Use long screws to reattach to your old spots, these guys here, and I think this one here. So you would need some kind of modified plate to make this thing square again. Another thing you can possibly do is use standoffs here along with longer screws in order to provide clearance for your magnetically held switch. So for that reason, I definitely would not recommend this if you need a flat surface to rest your throttle. And so let me just tuck this back in here. Hard to see over the camera, but we'll just, there we go. So just tuck this back down and just making sure I'm not pinching any wires. Turn this back over. So in this case, I actually have it hanging over the desk. So that's why it looks like it's flat, but it's really not. And so that's basically it. Once you do this mod, you'll have an extra 2 cables here. This guy to drive your I/O, and then this guy here for power. And I started to put in other additional features in it, like additional wiring, and maybe hide another switch on the side where you could select maybe manual or sim controlled EAC toggle switch. But that made it a little bit more too complicated, and I think most users probably wouldn't endeavor to try to make the distinguish between the two. So so anyway, at any rate, I was just wanting to go over a little bit in detail of what's involved in changing out this guy. And I'll show this drawing one more time, just so you can see the schematic. And one thing I did try before, the reason I used a 2-pole switch, initially I used a 1-pole switch, and I was using the target software to indicate the position of the EAC switch, and it kind of half worked. I mean, if it dropped out, the switch drops out, but I could re-engage it when I should not be able to, when I was using the target software. So to get around that, I used a 2nd pole. So the 2nd pole of the switch is going directly to the Arduino, and when I use that guy, it's operating correctly. Even though this is wired and it still can be monitored by your target software, I went inside the target software and I just deleted the keyboard assignment going to the EAC switch. I just took that out. But at any rate, this is kind of the schematic and some of the pieces that I used to do this. Just a couple of toggle switches. Of course, you need a 2-pole magnetic switch, and just basic hand tools like your needle nose pliers so that you can get to those guys. Regular Phillips head screwdriver, some wire cutters, of course some wire strippers, a little bit of heat shrink, of course soldering iron. I used a drill to get rid of that tab, and some wire, and just various little pieces of printed circuit boards, and I like a little hacksaw or something to cut that loose as well. And I just kind of showing the list again. So that's pretty much it. This would probably take you about a half a day to do, to kind of try to make everything look neat, I guess. But at any rate, I guess that's it, and thank you for watching, and good luck with your cockpits.